How much money do you actually need to retire? Maybe you've got that $1 million in your head ever since you were a little kid, but what type of lifestyle does that support? Well, as always, it depends. In this video, we're going to dive into the question, how much is enough to retire? We're going to explore popular rules of thumb, the research behind them, and then leave you with some practical tips to help you figure out your unique number. But before we jump in, hi, my name's Kurt. I'm a certified financial planner, and on this channel, I help people in retirement align their money and their meaning. So let's get into it. First, a quick reminder, while I am a financial planner, I'm not your financial planner. So please don't take any of this as personalized advice. But if I can help, you can always reach out to me in my calendar in my profile. So what is the magic number? Well, it turns out, even if we're just talking averages, a Wall Street Journal analysis in 2024 reported 1.46 million figure being the sweet spot on average, which was up from 1.27 million the year before. But they also noted that millennials now need an estimated 1.65 million, according to this one study. And I don't put a lot of stock into these surveys to begin with, and these are always averages, and no one is really average. Because if you think about someone that makes $1 million a year, their number is going to be very different from someone that makes $100,000 a year. So let's look at a slightly more custom approach. One of the more enduring rules of thumb is the income replacement ratio. So that says if you aim to replace about 80% of your pre-retirement income through a mix of Social Security, pensions, and withdrawals from your portfolio, that should get you where you need to be. Fidelity has some recent research that found most retirees spend between 60 and 80% of their working income. So for example, if you make $100,000 a year, you'd aim for 60 to 80,000 annually in retirement. And that's mostly due to the fact that you're not saving for retirement anymore. You're already there. So if you assume that you were saving 10 or 20%, that's where we back into that number. But this 80% rule is increasingly outdated as many retirees envision a more active, adventurous, and longer retirement that can actually require higher spending. Once you factor in rising healthcare costs, inflation, uncertain Social Security benefits, and shifting generational responsibilities, that makes retirement needs a lot more complex and variable. So instead of relying on this rigid rule of thumb, I suggest a more personalized strategy that categorizes needs and then wants. So if you could bucket in your needs first, then your wants, then budget for some larger one-time purchases, I think that'll give you a better foundation or starting point. And then you can always adjust that withdrawal rate over time based off your individual goals and circumstances. But even this 80% number really doesn't translate into a nest egg figure yet, but it can be the first piece of the puzzle. So next, let's talk about the 4% rule and its cousin, the 25x rule. To translate savings needs into a portfolio size, many rely on this 4% rule. So with this rule, you simply multiply your portfolio by 0.04, and this would be the amount that you could conservatively take out each year in retirement. So if you had a portfolio of, say, $2 million, multiply that by 0.04, we get 80,000 a year. That would be the amount that you could comfortably take out in retirement according to this rule. Or to do this another way, you simply take your annual spending and multiply it by 25. So if you multiply that same 80,000 a year, because that's what you need each year, by 25, we get to the same $2 million portfolio size that you'll need to support that lifestyle. But you really have to understand that this rule originated from what's called the Trinity study, which basically tested historical stock and bond returns, and it concluded that a 4% withdrawal rate on a completely diversified portfolio historically would have provided a safe withdrawal rate in a retirement for any 30-year period that it studied. Bill Bengen, who first formulated this guideline in 1994, he technically identified 4.2 as a conservative initial withdrawal rate. But in practice, this is hardly a good measuring stick because the reality is that financial markets and retirees' needs are constantly evolving. Recently, Bill Bengen, the guy that came up with the 4% rule, he even updated his stance and said in today's economic conditions, he thought you could get away with a 4.7 initial withdrawal rate, but even up as much as 5.25 or 5.5, depending on your portfolio diversification and whatever expectations you have for market returns. But he said historically, he believes a safe withdrawal rate could have been as high as 7%, although still recommends the conservative baseline of 4%. So this still doesn't answer our question. But Schwab has some research that cautions this rule of thumb. Why a helpful guide, these are all really blunt tools. The 4% rule may fail if you retire at a market peak or you experience really high inflation or you have some unexpected expenses like healthcare costs. This is why finding the right number really depends on your personal situation. In practice, using a more dynamic method that tethers withdrawals to market performance or inflation, it can really reduce the risk of eventually depleting your nest egg. So let's take a couple of these concepts and put them in a framework that hopefully is helpful to you. Step number one, you have to estimate your spending goal in retirement. If you want, start with 70 or 80%, but make sure you're modeling your own wants, needs, and one-time purchases to come up with a more realistic and accurate picture. Secondly, you have to decide which withdrawal rate is right for you. You can start with a default 4%, but maybe we could play with scenarios that 4.5 or even 5.5 could make sense based off inflation and your age at retirement. Step number three, multiply your spending by your withdrawal rate. So as an example, if you're spending $70,000 a year, divide that by 0.04, we get 1.75 million. This is another way you can kind of back into what that nest egg number needs to be for you. Step number four, we have to account for other income sources. So make sure to include Social Security, pensions, any other income that you have coming in. This will help reduce your nest egg target based off income that you'll receive and ultimately how far your money will stretch. And step number five, you have to build in flexibility. Plan buffer years, have emergency reserves, invest in a diversified portfolio, adjust withdrawal rates if your portfolio underperforms or if your healthcare costs rise. So my hope is if you could take these 5 steps, kind of customized to where you're at in your situation, you can come up with a ballpark of how much you'll need to enjoy the retirement that you dreamed of. So at the end of the day, what's the answer? There's no single magic number that fits for everyone. For a lot, saving $1 million can really align with those mainstream guidelines. But if you're going to live a more luxurious lifestyle in retirement, if you're going to help your kids along on their journey or have other unforeseen expenses in retirement, that number is obviously going to be very different. Your goal should be a personal one, grounded in real expectations, but also backed by a flexible and well-diversified plan. To recap, retirement math isn't always very straightforward, but it's not mystical either. So whether you're following the 4% rule or the income replacement ratio, the key is to tailor your plan, track the progress, and as always, remain flexible. If this gave you even one light bulb moment, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to help this channel grow, leave in the comments what you think your number might be. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.